Money. It's the one thing that comes up all the time that we get awkward about, we get weird about, we try to hold on to it, we worry about it. I talked today to Adrian Brambila. You do not want to miss this. He's just launched an incredible book, Start Thinking Rich, and it's all around money mindset. His ability to shift mindset and to help thousands, getting close to probably more, so millions across the world, is phenomenal. And this episode will absolutely serve you and your wealth mindset, your money mindset. And it's all about how do we start thinking rich? What does that look like? What does that feel like? And he makes it so, I feel, simple and tangible. There's also a really incredible giveaway that we're going to have at the end of the show. We're going to put the link for that in the show notes, but he was very generous with that, and you don't want to miss it. So I hope you enjoy the show. The Lead on Purpose podcast is sponsored by NZ Mortgages. Learn more at nzmortgages.co.nz. Adrian, a huge welcome to the Lead on Purpose podcast.
Hey, thanks so much for having me.
Oh, I'm so excited. The title of your book got me fizzing. Why? Because I've read Think and Grow Rich for years. Since I was 18, I picked it up many years ago, lived in Northern Ireland. I wasn't broke, but I'll tell you what, I didn't come from much money. A hard working class family. Mom and dad worked so hard to put food on the table, but there was never an abundance of it. And I was always curious as to, is it reserved for special people? Is money only for wealthy people that grow up in wealthy areas? I started reading it and going, wow, I could try some of that. And I started to see some things unfold. Then I'd go back to my old habits and I'd reread it years later. Your book, when it came up, Start Thinking Rich, it really reminded me, and I'd love you just to kind of prove or disprove this. It reminded me that most of us, me included, we often think in scarcity. And it's built into our psyche. So when I seen Start Thinking Rich, it was like, hey, Adrian's challenging me here. It's a call to action. It's a reminder. So would you say that scarcity thinking is the norm?
I do think scarcity thinking is the norm. We just think of that's why the 1% is the 1%. It's only a makeup of 1% of people. So you can say 99% of people don't have this rich mentality and mindset when it comes to money and abundance. And it's especially difficult for people who come from nothing. And my situation's just like yours. My parents were immigrants from Mexico to the USA. And so I adopted this immigrant mindset. And one thing we all inherit is something's called a money script. And this is our inherited belief on how money works. And guess who we get that from? Our parents. So, and naturally, because most people aren't born rich, we usually get a lot of bad things versus good. But even when you are born into a family that is doesn't have a lot of money, but they have what I would like to think is a rich mindset, like, hey, we should work hard, we should save for our future. These are things that rich people think of, whereas people that have a poor mindset, they just live in the moment. They think it's futile, there's no hope. So just like your family, you said they work hard. My parents too. They taught me to work hard that I could change my circumstance. But they also learned a money script, which sounds good. I'm curious to hear your opinion on this, but I had to evolve it. So this was the money script I received. Maybe you got something similar. If you're listening, you can relate. My money script was, if I want to make a lot of money, I have to work really hard and I have to sacrifice. Do you think this is true?
Oh my God. I totally resonate with that.
So I think this is very important. And when you have, and you're coming from a survival standpoint, when rich people, they actually don't all have this belief. And so my perfect example of where this money belief changed was when I graduated from college, I was making minimum wage. I also had multiple odd jobs. I used to be a professional hip hop dancer. So I used to literally be a go-go dancer at an 80s club. And I was doing all these odd dance jobs on top of working at a call center. And then on the side, I started posting on YouTube and trying to make money from dance videos online. Fast forward 2.5 years, I finally made $1,000 in 1 month when I launched a product. But here's the thing. When I received that $1,000, which was life-changing money, I didn't celebrate it. I wasn't happy. I actually felt guilty because my money script was, in order to make a lot of money, I have to work really hard and I have to sacrifice. And so that's what I was doing in all my regular 9 to 5 and odd jobs. I felt pain. And that money was coming in was also, it's like, I'm working hard, I'm making this money, I'm doing multiple jobs. And then I made $1,000 online teaching people how to dance the robot, which was actually fun, which is something that I loved. It didn't match my money script. And instead of celebrating that, I actually felt pretty guilty. I started to think about, Mexicans and our family, how like they have to usually work hard manual labor jobs and they have to sweat in order to work. And again, they have to work hard and they have to sacrifice a lot. So my money script had to change. And when I made that change, making money actually became less emotional and actually is fun. And today I still actually think it's fun. It's almost like a game, but I had to change it where the more value I create, the more money I make. That's not something that I was raised to believe. And when you're in survival mode, it's hard to think like that. You have to think it has to be painful and you have to sacrifice, which again, for most people, this is true, but it's also not a way in terms of like, well, how much sacrifice does a billionaire have to make once they already made millions and they grow it to multiple billions? How much sacrifice does someone that is a millionaire and then they become an 8-figure entrepreneur? Is sacrifice the way that you keep leveling up? And the answer is actually no. You have to think more like a rich person, having a rich mindset with money and just flipping from a survival mindset to one of abundance.
That's so inspiring to hear. And it's interesting. A couple of things that came to mind for me as you were sharing that was, as a child, I remember hearing a lot from multiple people around me, James, money doesn't grow on trees. And I was like, oh God, yeah, I know that. I know it doesn't grow on trees. What does that mean? Count your pennies and save and scrimp and protect and hold. And I had no idea about investing. I had no idea about compounding interest. I had no idea about entrepreneurism. No idea. And I had this idea that money is very scarce. And that really impacted me for years until a book changed my life and my mind. And I imagine this book of yours, which is available today, is starting to change people's lives and their minds. The word rich is interesting. So I'll share with you what was said to me as a young kid by a family member. There was someone driving by, I think it was a Porsche, might have been a Ferrari, but one of the two. And this person said to me, an older person in my life, said, that person's not to be trusted. I was like, what do you mean? Don't trust rich people, James. What they've done to get that car, you won't believe what they've had to do to get that car. Rich people, nah, don't trust them. And so, of course, as a young kid, you start to believe this, right? You believe that every person that has lots of wealth has clearly had to push others aside and do awful things to get there. That really had a damaging impact on my relationship with money, with investing, with even socializing with people who were successful in the first probably 15, 20 years of my adult life. It was kind of pushing back from that and avoiding that. What do you think about that mindset? Is that a normal thing for some people to have labels around what rich is?
Yeah, this also has to do with how you were raised, and this still falls in line with that money script definition. What's really awesome about my co-author, Dr. Brad Klontz, he's one of the leading psychologists of wealth in the world. He actually pioneered this concept, so it was great to work with him and collaborate in our book. But these ideas that in order to make a lot of money, you have to take advantage of someone. In order to the people that are rich, they had to do something wrong or evil to get there. Or maybe you heard things that hey, we don't have a lot of money, but at least we're happy, as if money cannot equal happiness. One of the most popular studies ever done was a gentleman in the UK. He came up with this number of where does money and happiness equal the to more money equals more happiness, and when does that point fall off? And they come up to this with this study that it was $75,000 a year. This was done dozens of years ago. Have you heard this number? $75,000.
I have heard it.
Oh, well, it's been disproven. We talk about newer studies in our book, but it makes sense at that time. $75,000 a year was essentially middle class, maybe upper middle class, and you could get all the things that you need. But it's been since proven that after $75,000 a year, you can actually continue to be happier with your money. And there's really no limit. There's really no limit at all. But I actually feel like I got brainwashed by this study. In the book, I actually have an image, a screenshot I took of my journal entry. I started journaling back in 2010, and I have it written in my journal. I want to make $75,000 a year one day and have $400 in disposable income. That's how much it brainwashed me. And why did I pick 75,000 and not 85,000? Because I didn't want to have $10,000 more and be $10,000 less happy. I was totally brainwashed. But the reality is, the more money you make, the more fulfilling life you can have. But it comes with a challenge. How are you spending your money? And you have to start working on what we call lifestyle design. So are you accumulating to accumulate? Are you getting lost in surface level, meaningless purchases? And are you lost in the ability, like, you want to just flex and show off your success? Because these are all surface level stuff. I think financial freedom, my best definition is that you actually control every hour of your day, and you're operating because I want to versus I have to. And that's choice. That's time freedom. Now, what you do with that time, I don't judge. It's all up to you. But if you are spending it trying to impress others and live a life that's not true to yourselves, typically it will lead to a life of, I would say, lower happiness and unfulfillment. And I think, honestly, if you can live without money problems, you have a huge responsibility to ask a much deeper life question when you don't have to worry about bills is, how should I actually spend my life? What should I do with it? And most people never get to even ask that question seriously because it's like, how do I make rent? Or how do I make sure my business doesn't fail? So when you're thinking like that, you can't think in terms of abundance of like, how do I live my best life? How do I leave an impact in this world? How do I help people? Most people don't get to that because they have money problems or they're high income earners, but they don't think about the future. What's another crazy stat in the US, that 50% of people that make six figures live paycheck to paycheck. So it's not a money income problem. It's actually a wealth skill set of that ability to save and that ability to then invest for your future self. And so it's fascinating how money is, just because you make a lot of money doesn't mean that you're good at saving it or investing it. There's countless examples, as you know, of athletes and lottery winners in the US. 70% of them in 5 years lose it all. And we can judge them and shame them like, what idiot. When he was a pro athlete, he made 100 millions. What an idiot. But this person, just because they have a high income skill doesn't mean they have a wealth skill set. So instead of judging them, it's more of just a realization how important financial literacy is.
Yeah, I'm with you on that. I can think of an example actually recently. So a friend of mine was on the show and he was sharing this story. And when he was in his late 20s, he was smoking a lot of weed. He was just making enough money to pay rent, literally scraping by. But every month he managed to figure out how to pay rent. On his 30th birthday, he said to his family, I don't want to see any of you. I want to spend the day by myself. And he walked around the yard, I think in his dressing gown, like a house coat, and with a pad of paper, and started thinking, going, well, if I know I got to make $26,000 a year to live and survive, and I do it, well, imagine if I just said to myself I needed to make 100,000 or 1,000,000. I'd probably figure it out. Clearly, I've got the resourcefulness to do that. So he decided then what his vision was. He wanted to be a millionaire. He wanted to have a business, and he wanted to be a publisher. And he'd barely read many books, never mind published one. And fast forward a year, as he changed his thinking, he'd co-founded New World Library, which, as many listeners might know, has published Eckhart Tolle, publishes all of Deepak Chopra's books. It's one of the top publishers on the planet for spiritual and self-help books. He's a multimillionaire, all because he decided to think differently. So when you tell me that story, I totally resonate. His name's Mark Allen, and he rewrote a book called As a Man Thinketh. Very, very short little book, and it's just an absolutely brilliant book. Now, I want to talk about the thinking aspect of this. So why do you believe it's, start with thinking rich rather than start acting rich, start doing rich things? Why does it start with thoughts?
I think it starts with thoughts because I have an assumption for everyone listening here that everyone actually knows the tactics of how to become wealthy. Like, first, your income. If there's multiple ways to increase your income, a quick Google search, a quick YouTube search, and all of a sudden you've learned a new skill set. Maybe you're learning into all the amazing things AI can do for you. And so these are just searches away. You know they exist. You just have to do it, right? And then also when it comes to saving, I have this assumption that you should save more than you spend. right? When money comes in, you should actually save it, have an emergency fund. You should be saving your money. You shouldn't constantly be inflating your lifestyle with the income you make. Otherwise, you're just living a paycheck to paycheck at a higher level. I have this assumption. I also have this assumption that everyone knows how to invest. Like in the US, if you work a 9 to 5, there's a 401k retirement plans. I know I lived in Ireland. There's pensions. There's different retirement vehicles there for your future self. I assume this is not the first time you've ever heard of it, right? So I assume everyone knows that what to do, and they need to save, they need to invest. Then why don't people do this? Because it's actually the psychology of how we think about money. And so this is why understanding your money scripts, your parents' beliefs on money, their parents' beliefs on money can actually affect you generations. Why do generations of poverty exist? How is it that everyone is in our family is broke? Like, how do we break that cycle? It's because we're inheriting these thoughts and beliefs. So the way you think about money, even if you're like, let's say you've been at a plateau for a very long time. Again, my plateau was that $75,000 a year mark. I actually was, I can't think of specific examples, but I know because I had that number in my head, I wasn't thinking of ways to make more than that. And so there's probably a level, if you've been at a plateau, you have something in your psychology that's keeping you there, that maybe you have to tap into. And for me, I don't know about for you, James, because I don't know your family. I'd like for you to share, but like I am the first Brambila that is really changing the family tree in terms of like, my kids will be the first kids who will have like, they could potentially be a trust fund kids, because I've really created a lot of wealth faster and larger than anyone else because my parents immigrated here. My dad grew up in poverty in Mexico. And so with that thinking, now that I have like this abundance mindset, there's no limit that I'm going after. But I had a lot of work to do, and I'll always have work to do on like new levels. Anytime I reach a new income level, it's like this new place of uncertainty. And so sometimes if we haven't been there before, we also, how do we know if we're doing the right thing? So our psychology and what we make right now, it's actually a true reflection of our thoughts. I think that, and especially in the US, there's a lot of entitlement. Everyone believes that they should be paid more. We have a chapter in our book says you're actually paid exactly what you're worth. Mm-hmm. I don't mean that in your human value. That's priceless. I'm talking about your economic value, and that's a whole mindset shift. Is like, actually the money that I'm making right now is an accurate reflection of my value and my skill set and my marketability. And so if that's like a mindset check right there, it's how you think. And one way to look, if you hear that and you're like offended, like, well, then you should actually be empowered to say, hey, actually, if I am in control of where I'm at now, that means I can control and increase it. I can, or, it's very obvious, like you could also do very bad things and decrease it. So it's actually totally up to us. And so the mindset and the way we think make the tactics executable and turns into habits. If James, if we want to break down the tactics and actually how to invest and make it super tactical, we can, but I have assumption that I'm not going to share anything that you haven't heard before. It's more of like the way we think about money affects if we execute on the things we're supposed to be doing with money.
Yeah, I love that. And Adrian, it's interesting. Sometimes money can be taboo in conversation. I'm in New Zealand currently. Obviously, my accent wouldn't suggest that, but it's the same where I grew up. Talking about money, how much do you earn? Where do you invest? Hey, how's your retirement looking? What have you got in there? What will you end up with? Hey, what's your strategy for investing? Hey, how much debt have you had over the last 10 years? We just don't ask those questions. And there's almost an ugliness to going there. And I just wonder why, because, when you talk to divorce lawyers, often they say that it's not infidelity being the number one driver of separation. It's financial issues, financial constraints or challenges. So actually, it's really important that we do talk about it. And I was told, the money doesn't grow on trees. So my little son, from a very young age, I started teaching him something a bit different. And so he was about 6 or 7 when we went back to Ireland. And we're in Ireland and a family member is chatting to him and he goes, I want that toy. I'd really like that, please. And he'd already gotten one that day. And they said, Finn, you just need to appreciate, money doesn't grow on trees. And his head whipped around real fast. He went, yes, it does. And the family member said, excuse me? And looked over at me and he says, my dad told me money grows on trees and it's everywhere. All I've got to do is appreciate that the tree is my mind. And if I water it and feed it by reading and asking questions and being more valuable, money just shows up. And I got a little smirk from this family member. But it was, to me, a testament to Finn understanding that money is all about value. It's all about the mind. It's all about thinking differently. And I do believe, I don't know whether he'll be, a trust fund child, but I certainly know he will understand how to generate value, which in turn will generate, I believe, financial flow. So these thoughts, the tactics, let's get into the book. What are some of the key components that you've wrote about along with your co-author that are tactical that people can pull away and implement in their lives?
For sure. I definitely want to say that what you've already passed on to your son is actually more valuable than the money that you'll pass on. And the way of thinking about money, you've already changed your money script of what you inherited. Now your son inherited a totally more abundance type of mindset when it comes to money. And why I say it's more important than money you pass on, because if you did not impart on this lesson, but let's say you continue to increase success and you leave a large inheritance for them, and if what's more important is if you deliver and give them a rich mindset, and if they have a poor mindset when it comes to money, it's just a matter of time, no matter how much you leave them until that money is gone. Yeah. So one of the things in the book is we do a rich test. We can do it right now. Feel free to, after I give you this question, I want you to pause the podcast or think about it. If I was to give you $1 million right now, or $1 million in your currency, what would you do with it? And I want to make clear, like go all out. If you're a generous person, think generously. If you want to retire your parents, hit me with everything, think about it, write it down, and then hit pause. Okay? And then we're back. So there's actually only one answer a rich mindset would have. They take 100% of it and they invest it. And then using something like the 4% rule in the States and the average stock market for the S&P 500, for example, and there's global index funds too, over the time span of the stock market has returned around 10% for the last 100 years. So you take 4%, it's $40,000 a year. And whatever answer you selected, and again, I don't mean to judge or shame you. And if you had really amazing things like retire your parents and get them a house, again, those are things I hope one day you can do that. But what someone that doesn't have a rich mindset does is they start subtracting the $1 million. Oh, first, I want to take that trip to Italy. Then I do want to get a nicer car because my car's a beater. Then I want to get a nice flat for my parents and for myself. And all of a sudden, and I'm guilty of this too, when the lottery is really big, you just fantasize of all the stuff you have. And you're literally subtracting your $1 million because on that day you become a millionaire. And then by the end of all the things you're written down, you're not a millionaire anymore. And so a rich person, and one of my favorite answers that people think is, I would take that and start a business. Even though this person has no business experience, and at least in the States, 95% of businesses fail. So most likely you're going to lose your money. But if you invest 100% of it, that money continues to grow. You could take that $40,000 and then start your business. And guess what? If it fails, you can try again next year and the year after and the year after. And this is, I think, another concept in the book. We talk about why it's very expensive for people who don't have money, why everything feels expensive is because they're trading time for it. This is a huge difference on how rich people think. And when I say poor people and rich people, I just want to be clear. I'm not actually talking about money. I'm talking about a way of thinking, because I don't ever mean to shame someone that doesn't have money. So when I say poor people from now on and rich people, I just want to make that clear. So here's how a poor person thinks when it comes to buying something. Let's say they want to take a trip and go to Italy, and it costs $1,000. And let's say this person actually has a decent hourly wage of $100 per hour. They think, okay, it costs $1,000 to take this trip. I'm just going to do a quick little weekend trip, and I make $100 an hour. So I need to work 10 hours, and then I can have enough money if I save all of that, and then I can go. Essentially, how they're thinking is, how much time do I need to trade so that I can go on this trip? Rich people don't think like that at all. They know that time is their most valuable asset. They will never trade it. And so how a rich person thinks is like, I want to go to Italy, but I don't want to trade my time or my income job. What can I invest in that's going to pay me $1,000 every single month so I could go to Italy every month, not just one time? And that's a totally different mindset shift between how money works for a rich person versus a poor person. Is a poor person is always trading their time for objects or experiences, where a rich person is thinking of like what can they invest in where their money makes enough money to cover their entire cost of living, plus anything nice they want to have or gifts they want to do or any purchases. They never want to trade their time for that.
That's incredible. It got me thinking when you asked people to pause there and just reflect on the $1 million question. I've got some work to do. So as you asked that, I thought, what would I do? So my first thing was like S&P 500 or Vanguard. I was like, boom, it goes there. And I was like, nah, before I do that, I believe in the law of reciprocity. I was like, I'm going to take 20% of that and give it to a charity that I really care about. And so I was like, I'll take 200K, give it to them, 800K S&P. And then when you started speaking, I was like, James, you're an idiot. So what I should do is put $1 million in S&P or wherever I decide to get my high returns or 10% on average a year. And then for life, donate 20% of the return I get every year to that charity. That was like an aha moment. So I've got work to do there on the mindset.
That's beautiful. I think you could have said it better. That's a totally different way of thinking and having your money work for you. So I got really popular on the internet. I went from like 100,000 to nearly 2 million followers in 1 year. And it was because during the pandemic, my wife and I were living in a van, like a little RV van, driving across the country in the US. And my income was really high for a year or two beforehand, and it still is. And I've always documented how much money I make online. And so I would have videos that would sound something like, hey, my name's Adrian. I live in this van, and this is my dashboard where I made $100,000 last month online. And so I would do variations of this, and I've always shared how much money I made since my very first 45 cents, which took 2 years to make, by the way. And then people reaction was like, first of all, this guy has to be a scammer, fake or fraudster. And the reasoning was because he lives in a van. No person that makes $100,000 in a month would live in a van. No person that's a millionaire would live in a van, because I was like a visual contradiction of what people think wealth is. They thought wealth is objects. I needed to have a Lamborghini or fly private or do videos of me in my large mansion. And I was saying, no, I live in this van here by choice. I make 7 figures a year. I'm already a bona fide millionaire, and I actually own all my time, and I only check my Wi-Fi and work 1 day a week, and that's my freedom. And that's the message where I started to talk more about money, when I realized that people's perception of wealth is all wrong. But it's not a surprise, because if you go back in ancient history, wealth and status have always been part of our almost DNA since we were in tribes. Think of the Egyptians. They were so obsessed with status that they buried themselves with all their fancy stuff, just to show everyone, like, how big is your tomb? Oh, my tomb's going to be really big, and I'm going to have the nicest jewelry in it. So this idea that status is tied to wealth, it is inherently baked into our DNA. And hardwired from our ancestors. So breaking from the mold of that, it feels like a contradiction. And so I just leaned into that. And that's a message I want to continue to spread, because I wish people own their time. It makes no sense to me why people would rather buy a nicer car to drive to work than versus not have to work.
Mm-hmm. I love that. And it's interesting when you talk about living in a van, 100K a month. There's going to be someone listening now going, what on earth? Yeah, right. How did he do that? So I'm going to ask you, Adrian, what were you doing to generate 100K a month living in a van?
Well, first I'll say I started creating content in 2010. So after 9 years of, after 10 years of working as an entrepreneur, I'm now making a 7-figure income. I want to make that clear, so it doesn't seem I just happened to luck onto something. And I also mentioned it took me 5 years working online as a side hustle before that made $50,000 a year, which was the same as my 9-to-5 job, to quit. So 10-year journey, I'm 10 years in. I just happened to live in a van, but I've already been working on and was a successful entrepreneur by most definitions. have made most of my money still today as an affiliate promoting other companies. And what types of products? I don't know any products that are in your country, but like there's a very popular smoker grill that's called a Traeger grill. And I've sold things like tea. There's a really awesome tea company called Peak Tea. I've sold backpacks and all kinds of things really based off products that I like. And how I attract people is I started many blogs back in 2010. So I have blogs, and then with social media, creating content. The most when I learn about influencers, they're really great at attracting attention, but they don't know how to monetize. And I've been monetizing really early, so when I get more traffic, I know how to show the right offering to those people. But I've sold pretty much and tried every single way of making money online except for selling feet pics.
Good. I love it. And tell me this, like, when you look at content and social media, I look at platforms. I'm like, cool, you've got 12 million people that are following you on Instagram, whatever the thing might be. But I'm like, that platform could die tomorrow. The algorithm could change in a second. I imagine, I'm going to make an assumption here. I imagine that email is a very important part of your strategy. Do you have a pretty decent email list?
Yeah, it's the number one strategy. Well done, Chase. Yeah, I have a few brands. My personal brand, for example, has over 150,000 people on it. But I have a fitness brand and a minimalism brand, and so all these brands, they each have around 20, 30,000 emails. I probably have like 800,000 emails across everything. But yeah, like there was a social media platform back in the day called Vine. Did you ever hear that one?
Yeah, I did. Yeah.
Yeah, I was hot on that. I had 30,000 followers really early, and then poof, it's gone. And that was my lesson of like, wow, we actually don't own social media. So it's very important. And like to protect yourself, you need to capture leads. And actually, I'll show another quick tip. This is as of super new, a regret of mine as an entrepreneur of not collecting phone numbers. So I only started collecting phone numbers like in the last 12 months. And now I have 8,000 people on my text message list. And this is the most powerful thing I can do because text messages open at like a 98% rate. And so when I send a text, it is like I click a button and money appears. It's amazing. Even though I have 150,000 emails, my open rates are like everyone's. It's 30% to 40%, and the click-through rate between 2% to 5%. So it's like, yeah, 150,000 sounds like a lot, but it's not a 95% open rate. When I send a text, though, it's like boom. So I changed all my forms across all my websites: name, email, phone number. And the conversion, I'm getting a little tactical here, but the conversion rate drops dramatically, but I'd rather have a higher qualified lead versus have just a name and email. So that's one thing I've adopted in my business. I recommend anyone that collects leads to always collect phone number as well.
That's incredible. I like that long game thinking of going, hey, I'll get less people giving me their details because there's one more point of friction, which is, a number that they've got to type in. But if they do come in, then I'm actually going to be able to add more value to their lives because the conversion rate's higher. So very tactical question. Is that international? If someone from Uzbekistan or the UK comes to your website, puts their international number in, is it global?
If someone comes internationally, right now only on my personal brand, I have like WhatsApp connected to it, and
Great.
through my CRM that I use Go High Level. They are international. I highly recommend them, and I'm actually a brand ambassador for them. I use them for all my businesses. It's just the best way to keep track of people, and includes international as well. But I don't know what's the best tool depending on your country that you're based in, but I know High Level has huge plans for international, and I just spoke at their conference last week, so they're super top of mind.
Incredible. I've heard lots about Go High Level and lots of friends that have used it in the past, and I think it's fascinating. And for those that are not, maybe don't have a personal brand that are listening, it's going, hey, how do I add value to the market? How do I become more valuable? How do I convert that energy spent into, hey, what's going to come out the other end? So in the book, you've obviously had lots of people read it. You've had lots of people pre-order it. It's available. I'm going to put it in the show notes. What have been one or two topics or chapters that have really been popular with readers?
Well, I can tell you the most controversial chapter, and we knew it before it went in the book because between my co-author and I, we have like a little over 3 million followers. And we tested each 21, we have 21 chapters. We tested each chapter headline to sound like a hook, as if it was like to reel people in. And we leaned into a little bit more edginess or controversy to try to attract attention. And some of it can sound offensive, actually, taken out of context. But then the chapters are deep dives and they're almost like a loving hug. But the chapter title is like maybe a punch in the stomach. So one of them in particular was, if you want to get rich, you have to get rid of your poor friends. Ooh, that made a lot of people upset. They thought I was a total ass to say these things, because it does sound like an ass, like, wow. So just because someone doesn't have money means I can't be friends with them. But that's actually not to our definitions, which we define in the very first page of the book. Poor and rich have nothing to do with money. They have to do with ways of thinking. So poor friends, again, people that have poor ways of thinking, often do not save for the future. They think it's pointless. They think the system is rigged and you can never get ahead. And so they're the kind of people that when they're counting down the days till payday, because when payday hits, they're going to go to the pubs or they're going to go and blow it all. This is what someone who has a poor mindset does. Whereas a rich mindset, they're optimistic about their future. They think that most of the world is in their control, understanding that not everything is. They're planning ahead. They're working. They like learning. They like reading. They have an open mind about how the world works. By the way, like the more successful people I feel like everyone has this assumption that I actually don't know it all, even though I just wrote a book on money. If I learn something that's wrong, like when I say, oh my gosh, I wrote something different in my book. Am I wrong? I need to learn. And that's what a successful person sounds at. Whereas someone that has a poor mindset usually narrows, like, that's not how it works. Or like, there's no point in doing that. Like, the stock market's rigged. It's too risky. Don't invest. Don't even trust the banks. The banks will the banks could collapse, right? They're super narrow-minded way of thinking. So finding rich friends is not about asking, hey, are you a millionaire? I'd like to be your friend. Obviously, it's a recipe for disaster. I think it's more of like finding people that are around your level who are trying to ascend. And they talk about, I want to get ahead. I'm trying to save. I'm trying to invest. I'm trying to learn. That's the circle that you want to be in. The toughest part is when your family is maybe doesn't have the same type of mindset you have. I didn't have this problem, but I did have it with one of my best mans at my wedding. I realized that he was an anchor, but I loved him like a brother. And so, my advice for that, when it's someone that's closer family member, is not to just totally get rid of them, but to love them from afar. And then when it comes to topics like money, these aren't the best people to talk about. Or like, I teach a lot of people how to make money online. And often when these people get in, they're really excited about the opportunities like AI and what they can do. And then naturally, when you're excited, what do? You share with your friends. But then when they share with their friends all this stuff that they're doing, their friends, I think it's actually out of love, will be like, ooh, that sounds risky. That sounds like a scam. Like, you won't be able to do it. And it's just because you're doing something different. And we're really tribal by nature. And when you ascend, when you go from your level now to a higher level, it's kind of like you're leaving the tribe. You're leaving the tribe of where you're at. And, the best analogy I read all the time in self-help books is a boiling water full of crabs. And when there's one crab that wants to leave, what do the other crabs do? They bring them down. And how they bring you down it's like through these passive aggressive comments. Like, let's say you get a promotion at work and your friends know it. You got the new job, and they might say things like, wow, must be nice. Must be nice for you to, like, how lucky you. Well, not everyone can get a promotion. Not everyone can make money online. Not everyone gets speaking gigs. And so these little subtle comments are just like, I always like to think it's actually because they love you and they're scared to lose you. But these are signs that I think you need to find a new tribe of people, because when I hang out with my friends that are my rich friends, they lift me up. They inspire me. Actually, my co-author, Dr. Brad Clance, he landed a speaking gig before the book was published. We talk about this in the book. It was his high speaking gig. It was $30,000. And before he messaged me, he said, Adrian, I don't have many people to share this, and I don't want to come across as bragging, but I just got a speaking gig for $30,000, and he gave this huge disclaimer. He probably said some other stuff, and I just interrupted him, and I was like, Brad, it will never be bragging to me. I will always celebrate your wins. And that's what a rich friend does, is they celebrate your wins. I wasn't envious of him. I was so excited for him. And so if you don't have anyone in your life that's doing that, it's important that you try to find someone.
Such great advice. And honestly, I get it. I've got a friend who's in a very niche. He sells musical instruments in a very musical instrument niche area. And he said, James, do you know what? I sold like $200,000 worth of this one tiny little thing. I was like, man, high five. Let's celebrate. That's epic. And he's making a fortune doing what he loves, adding value to a market. And, I'm similar to you. I'm on the speaking circuit, and I'm just in the abundance mindset of, you know what? I got hired today, and this conference is going to happen again next year. But they're not going to invite me to speak. That'd be weird. That guy spoke this year. So I often like going to the organizers. Hey, thanks for having me today. Here's 2 people you should consider inviting next year. They're phenomenal at what they do. Great speakers. Here's their details. Go get in touch. And I believe in we have to help each other in abundance, because as soon as it's all about us and world revolves around me, that Ram syndrome, God, I think we start to attract scarcity rather than abundance.
That's so good. I know you're a rich friend, so you're a rich friend, and typically this is what happens because you have a rich mindset. You probably make your inner circle more money just by doing things like that. And I like to think of it too. Like, a lot of my close friends have a side hustle that has made money because of me, because I love sharing this stuff. And so I think that's what a rich friend does. They lift you up, and they bring you with them if they're on the path, and they help you. So yeah, and community is so important. The law of averages, that's kind of where we took a different stance, a more aggressive stance, that you want to be rich, you got to get rid of your poor friends. But I know everyone's heard you're the average of the 5 people you surround yourself by. It's the same exact concept of finding people who are on an ascension path and thinking for their long-term self versus just living in the moment.
This is so interesting. I was challenged recently. It was on LinkedIn, and I was talking about, it was actually a visual image I put up, and it was around, you're the average of the 5 people that you surround yourself with. And someone commented pretty quickly going, and it was a very well-known New Zealand rugby star, and they used him as an example. So his name's Richie McCaw, arguably one of the most world-class rugby stars of all time, world champion. So they said, hey, I think this is nonsense, essentially, what you're saying. Richie McCaw, what about him? Are you trying to say that he, the GOAT, was the average of the 5 people around him? And I just thought about it for a second. And I went back after some thought, and I went, absolutely. He was the average of the 5 people around him, and that's what made him the greatest of all time. Think of the coaches he had that knew more than he knew. Think of the other incredible players that were more skilled in other areas than him. Think of the physio that he had, who was way more skilled at understanding the body than he knew. I was like, he was great, partly because of the incredible people around him. And he was the average of these experts and world-class people. So I think it pertains to life, work, money, physical health, everything.
That's so important. I think there's one chapter I wanted to talk about for your audience that you shared with me before here, because we have a lot of people, I think, listening that are successful, have great incomes. And so hopefully you're starting to think in terms of wealth now, in terms of time. One of our chapter titles in the book, again, is kind of a punch in the face. We say retirement is for dead people. So what's funny about this, at least in America, you have to tell me what it's like in New Zealand or Northern Ireland, but retirement is painted in this sepia tone picture of sitting on a beach somewhere and with a Mai Tai or pina colada. And I don't know, is it the same for you? Like, it's this like idleness, sitting somewhere doing nothing.
Yeah, like in the waiting room of life, right? Just like in waiting for death. Like, yeah, I've got a cocktail, 100%.
Yes, and this, I think, is a terrible thing that's being marketed to us. I was in Japan for almost a half a year this year in Asia, and in Japan they actually have a government program called retired husband syndrome, and because there's the Japanese that are ingrained in their culture, they're very hardworking, almost obsessed. They work crazy hours, the working man, and when they retire, they lose their purpose. And so they literally go crazy. So a government program was created to help with this problem of retirement, this act of doing nothing. And so retirement, to think one day you're going to sit on the beach and do nothing. And I've actually tried this. I last about 10 days and one or two things happen: boredom or diarrhea. From one drink. Like one of those things usually gets you. And so the act of doing nothing, I think is that's a terrible goal for us, to work our whole life to eventually do nothing. And so when you think of like retirement, I think you should never essentially retire, but you should find something that brings you fulfillment and joy. And this is what's really important, that you start doing this today, because this is a problem with retirees and even my parents that came from nothing, came from the ultimate struggle. And now, because they did such a good job saving and investing, they have more than enough money that's coming in. They have abundance. But even though they have abundance on paper, they have scarcity in their mind. You know what their biggest problem is? Spending money. It's fascinating. They cannot spend their money. They just were here in Austin, and for example, they should be flying first class, but they don't. They sit in economy. And I tell them, like, why don't leave me this money? Like, you earn this money, spend this money. If you leave me this money, I'm going to do something ridiculous. I'm just going to blow it all on Lamborghinis, or I know who you're going to vote for. I want to put it all into the opposing political party. Like, you guys got to spend your money. But this is a huge thing, is like, if you just are always in scarcity mindset, working hard, sacrificing, and then you eventually make it, it's impossible to flip this switch. Okay, now I'm going to be a spender and live my best life. Impossible. And this is a huge problem with retirees right now, is that they struggle and they lose purpose. So today, it is your job to find and start adding things that you love to do, that you're going to do no matter how much money you make. And I'll share one very specific example. No matter how much money I make, one thing I love to do is I love to go to a coffee shop, a cafe, grab a latte, and then sit outside and drink it in the sun if it's a sunny day. I just love doing that. And in a lot of money financial books, they always attack coffee. Did you know that if you didn't have that oat milk latte frappuccino, that, that's $8 could be compounded into the stock market and be $1 million? Like, yeah, whatever. I love my cup of coffee. No matter how much money I make, I'm going to have it. And every day you should start living aspects of your life that you would do once you reach this level of financial freedom. Otherwise, the act of actually living will be the hardest decision you'll have to make. And you see that I'm struggling to try to teach my parents this. And a lot of people who've actually made it, they still are operating and living in scarcity. And I think that's sad.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's interesting. When you look at purpose, obviously I geek out on purpose and love to chat to people about the importance of meaning and purpose. And you look at the blue zones, those 5 particular parts of the world that have an outrageous proportion of centenarians, people over the age of 100, living healthily with community, mobile, and just in abundance. So one in particular was, you mentioned Japan, was in Okinawa, Japan. And they were like, why are there so many 100-plus-year-olds here living a thriving life? What are you guys doing? They had a thing called ikigai. And it was this understanding that you've got to have purpose in life and have passions and give back and contribute and stay connected. I think there's something really, truly important to look at there around wealth, around richness, money, thinking. But it's this idea of having a centered purpose. And it doesn't stop at 65. Here in New Zealand, that's kind of retirement age. God, we're just getting started. And if you've looked after your money and your health and your mind, at 65, you could have another 20, 30, 40 years of life. And wouldn't it be sad if you'd spent every dollar that you'd ever got and didn't believe in retirement funds and investing? You get to 65 and all of a sudden you're broke.
Yeah. Investing for your future self. This is the one, if we get tactical advice right now, I'm just going to mention this because I'm still surprised today. And I don't mean this to shame anyone. I'm surprised today how many high income earners actually don't invest. Or when I say, do you invest? I hear wild things. Like, actually, I flew first class from speaking at the Go High Level event to here. And my passenger, we started talking. I told him my book's coming out. And he started talking about investments. And I said, yeah. I said, do you invest? He said, yes. we invest. I actually just put $200,000 into a racehorse. And I was like, trying to hold back my shock of face that this is what someone who is sitting in first class, so in theory, can afford that seat. And their idea of a safe investment is training and raising a racehorse. And he shared the full story. It was a long flight. The very first horse he put down $200,000 after a year and a half of feeding it and growing it. They're like $250,000 or $80,000 in, and then he sold it for $900,000. So this actually was one of the worst things that could have happened to him, because in investing, especially in risky things, and this is called a speculative investment of the highest risk, he did really well the first time. And you might think that's great, but it creates, especially with males, it creates confirmation bias. It creates like, oh, everything I touch turns into gold. And actually, statistically speaking, this is why women are much smarter investors than men, because they don't suffer as much from confirmation bias or egos. And then who's better investment? Here's a question: dead people or living people?
Whoa. You'd automatically think living.
Dead people.
Wow.
Here's why. We're emotional creatures, and when we invest, like let's say you are doing the right thing, stock market, S&P 500, index funds, ETFs, it's diversified, it matches your goals, you're doing everything right. Stock market's looking good. Election season, we don't know who's going to become president, what's going to happen, and then let's say the stock market's going down, and then what do? And when I say we, I mean emotional creatures. We freak out and we look at our investments, and all of a sudden that $100,000 is now $70,000, and it's going down and down. And so what do? You withdraw it. You take it out. Whereas a dead person can't make that choice, and they just stay in the market. And that's why dead people outperform living people. But it's just fascinating because we're emotional creatures. We have to be stoic when it comes to our investments and think long term, and that we don't need this money. That's, when you invest, it's not about what the price is today, because when you invest, you shouldn't even be needing that money. It's like, I know no matter what, 30 years from now, this money is going to be better than today. And the perfect example is if you look at the last huge 2008 stock market crash. If you would have invested the month beforehand, when on the highest day before the collapse, like that investment today, you would be patting yourself on the back saying, that was a great investment. At the time, though, if you would have put all your money in a month beforehand and then the stock market crashed, you would have been freaking out. But today, again, with time, it's very hard for us to see time. And the last thing I just want to say with the person sitting on the right of me at first class, this is what he thought was investing. And so this is why high income earners, doctors, lawyers, attorneys, successful entrepreneurs, just because you're very successful at earning income does not guarantee that you are a great investor. And this is why I'm constantly surprised by people who, like all the people who invested in 8 NFTs, thinking that was good. Like they put all their money in and thinking that was going to be a great investment. That's not investing. That's called gambling. It's just fascinating. And cryptocurrency and all these things, again, I'm not against it, but you shouldn't ever invest more than 10% of your entire net worth into these incredibly risky assets, because in case it doesn't work out, in case that 8 NFT flopped, which it did, then you're not back at zero. At least you only invested 5% or 1% of your net worth. And it could win big, but in case it doesn't, you shouldn't. And by the way, to end that story with the horses, I kept asking him, so how many horses have you done now? He says, we're on our 5th horse. And I said, did you get the same result as that first horse? He's like, no, we're actually now down $500,000 over the last 5 years we've been doing it. So again, that was the biggest problem that could have happened to him, was that confirmation bias that everything he touches turns into gold.
Wow. Really, really good insight. And it's interesting when I think of the psychology of it. I love the idea of long game. And we have, I've got my, say, S&P, Vanguard. And then here in New Zealand, we've got a thing called KiwiSaver, which is essentially a retirement superannuation fund. I check that once a year. I literally go and look at it once a year on the renewal date, like, oh, cool, that's what's in there. And I just close it up, move on. Every year I forget the password for it, so I've got to reset it. And it's like, hey, I don't want to check it weekly or monthly or quarterly. Like, I actually don't care. I want to be checking it more often, maybe when I'm in my 50s, maybe a little more often when I'm in my late 60s and 70s. Yeah, it might be more volatile at that stage and I need the money. But right now, my late 30s, put it in, set, forget, dollar cost average every day of the week.
That's amazing. I think one thing my wife and I do, and this is something that I also recommend if you are in a relationship, it's super important that both of you have an understanding on money. One of the worst money scripts that females in particular get is something called money avoidance. Typically, it's very common in households that the wife is actually not involved in the finances, and again, we're in a marriage. You love each other, you trust each other with everything. And if you are in a marriage that shares finances, this is what I'm talking about. My wife and I, everything is ours. But it's very common for women to be like, oh, no, my husband takes care of it. My husband takes care of it. But then, what happens if, worst case scenario, you do get divorced, women are left hopeless because they have no idea how money works. They don't know where anything is. And even if the female in the household is a stay-at-home mom, you should still look at the finances. Again, I already shared with you that men are statistically worse investors than females. So think of that. But also think of terms of something just very logical. Two heads are better than one, right? So my wife and I, we both review everything together. We review everything that was spent. We do this. We have this like money monthly meeting. Review all the investments, all the expenditures, all the bank accounts, what our goals are, and it's that once a month financial health checkup. And I recommend everyone try to get there. And sometimes I get comments from podcasts afterwards like, well, I would, but my wife's a spender, so I don't want my wife knowing the finances. Like, if she's a spender, like it's actually okay to be a spender if you're doing the first thing you should do. First rule of personal finance and financial freedom: pay yourself first. So you're doing all the things, James. You said you're dollar cost averaging a portion of every dollar that you make. So that, as long as that is happening, you can be a spender because you're taking care of your future self. You're paying yourself first. It's okay to be a spender as long as you're doing that. If you're not investing, if you're not saving, and you're just a spender, yes, of course, that's bad and toxic. But I encourage all couples to get to this level, because once you do, you'll notice that your goals will accumulate faster. And it was hard for my wife and I to get to this point, but now that we have it, it's just a habit. It's a routine. So it's worth the drama and struggle. And here's another reason why you should. You know how expensive divorce is?
Yes, I do.
So if you think if it's not worth it, think of how costly it would be to get a divorce. So Please review your money with your partner.
Yeah, it's such great advice. And honestly, I can remember through past relationships, the challenge of talking about money, the stress of it. The thought of a budget's quite constraining. So I like to now talk about a spending plan rather than a budget. It's more kind of positive, focused on what I can do rather than what I can't do. And I'd like to chat a bit about the thinking concept of it. So Adrian, nowadays we have ChatGPT. We have large language models. Essentially, they're deep thinking models based on what we put in, and they use data, almost guessing, to come up with the best possible answer that we might want to hear. So when we think about, start thinking rich, is this something we can outsource to a large language model? Or is this something we've got to really embody ourselves? And probably combining with that, could we use LLMs and AI to help us on our wealth journey?
Well, I'm definitely pro AI. I use it in all my businesses and self. And there's just one part of this question that I don't like: the idea of outsourcing your financial freedom. I do not like this idea. I don't like outsourcing everything. It's like becoming financially literate. I'm sorry to tell you this, but it's something that you have to do. You have to do for multiple reasons. You have to get the education. Now, in terms of the execution, and I don't know what the proper term is in New Zealand or in Europe. We have financial advisors in America. There's good ones and there's bad ones. How are you supposed to know if you have a good one or bad one? You have to still educate yourself. Like, I think in terms of like when I have my AC actually exploded while I was in Japan, and when I got back, we had to replace our air conditioning. And I don't know anything about air conditioning, but I wanted to make sure it was done right. So I did a little bit of research and I educated myself just a little bit to know, like, is it working? Is this a good system? Like, I had to do some level of work. Again, I didn't install the air conditioning. So again, I outsourced it, but I still put a level of knowledge to know that I wasn't getting screwed over. And so when it comes to money, there are people, there are professionals to hire, and it is very important to get help. Every successful person I know gets help. They have a CPA, they have attorneys. They're not trying to do everything themselves. This is actually also a scarcity mindset. We call this do-it-yourself-itis. The idea that, oh, I don't trust anyone, I just need to do it myself. That's a poor way of thinking. Rich people, every rich person I know has a team, has help. They have a tax person. They're not trying to do their own taxes, because even though a tax person is going to cost you, what they save you is usually in so much more over their cost. So I wouldn't encourage anyone to outsource financial literacy. This is your burden if you want to become financially free. If you don't want to become financially free and own your time, then outsource everything and blindly trust people. But it's not my recommendation.
It's such good advice. It's I remember trying to figure out my tax in the early days. And now for the last probably 15 years, I've had an accountant who takes care of everything. It's all kind of automated. They have access to everything I need. I've got a financial advisor. I've got someone who helps in terms of mortgage brokering and gets the best interest rates. I don't try and do any of that because it's not my expertise. I've got time to spend on things I want to spend time on.
Exactly. This is the perfect rich mindset. Rich people ask for help. Rich people ask better questions, and rich people also buy time. So like you just mentioned, like you're getting help, and I would imagine you're really smart, James. You probably could do what you're outsourcing. This is again a difference between like a poor mindset and a rich mindset, where it's like, I can do it, so I should do it. But you're not thinking about the time savings that you have. Like today, like I remember when I first moved out of the van, I bought my house in Austin. My business was optimized. I had team, I had staff. And then all of a sudden I found myself doing my own dishes and cleaning my own house. And I was like, what? I didn't become rich so I could do chores. So then we hired a cleaner, and then we hired someone to take care of the yard. And then I have a chef that cooks food. And I thought that was hard of like, man, like I thought cooking is something I could never give up. But actually what I learned is like, actually, I don't really love cooking. I love eating. So it's great. I have a chef that taking care of stuff that way. So it's like, I'm doing all these things that buy back time. Like in movies, you see really rich people, like in New York City, they don't even drive their own car. So they're in the back, working or optimizing. So they're doing all these things to buy back their time. And I think in terms of like asking for help and buying back time, they're the best ways you can spend money to get to that point of financial freedom. Because we're so much like, the worst thing you could do is like earn financial freedom and then all of a sudden get stuck doing chores, for hours and hours each day.
100% with you on that. And when we chatted before, actually, I was chatting about how my audience, many of them love to take action. They're high performers. So you've shared so many tactics, but also with the book, I know that they can go and get it from local bookstores and Amazon, etc. However, you mentioned a little bit of a bonus for our listeners. Do you mind telling them what it is? And then we'll put the link in the show notes.
Yeah. So, first of all, thank you so much for having me on the show, James. And our book is available internationally everywhere. But if you go to startthinkingrich.com/James, it's going to include exclusive bonuses. That's just for a way to say thanks for James here for having us, that you won't be able to get anywhere else if you just get the book. So again, we definitely, if you are interested in learning more and the ability and all the tools and tactics to start thinking rich, startthinkingrich.com/James will be the best place for you to go. So you can get to learn. And then we have a community of people. We also have like monthly calls where we review our finances. So this monthly money meeting is something we offer to our community. If you want to do it with us, we're trying to help. And the reason why I created the book, I'll be honest, there's not a lot of money in books. We got an advance from the publisher, but all of it was reinvested. And I have lost money making this book and promoting it and flying everywhere to do these shows. But what matters to me at this point, because I'm operating because I want to, not because I have to, is I want to make an impact. And my dream is I'm going to wake up to messages of people saying, Adrian, I read your book, and now I actually understand my financial house is in order. My wife and I, we now work on our finances. And then one day, hopefully soon, people say, I am financially free because I read this book. So that's why I created the book. And if you relate to that, I would love for you to get it.
Adrian, that's amazing. And I've got another question for you just before we wrap up. But I'll tell you what, if Napoleon Hill had a way for me to contact him, meet with him monthly and learn from him, I'd be jumping on that right now. Think and Grow Rich changed my life. And, the thought of being able to learn from him and him be a mentor, amazing. So I know that for the people that buy this book, the access and proximity to you is going to be transformational for their lives. You're modern day Napoleon Hill. So thank you for doing what you do and continuing to do what you do. When I ask you one last question, I'd like you to imagine for a second. We fast forward many, many years into the future. You're highly aware that it's your last day here on earth. Someone very young comes into the room that you love and they say, Adrian, how do I go about leading my life on purpose? What would you say to them?
That's so good. Leading my life on purpose. I think the first thing I'd try to think about is to dig deep to figure out what is it that really compels you to wake up out of bed excited on to live your life. And to me, I don't think of income. I don't even think of business. I think of just, Christmas morning as a kid, waking up out of bed and going for presents, like that type of energy. I know there's times in my life where I've gone out of bed really excited. I know there's times in my life, transparently, where I didn't want to get out of bed. So when I have a purpose that I know, I wake up and I am so excited because I get to do the thing I want to do. I would describe that type of energy to find it. And you'll know you have it from that next morning when you wake up with your eyes wide open, being like, I'm ready to start.
Really, really powerful. Somebody needed to hear that right now. And I really appreciate you sharing that. Adrian, thanks for everything that you do. Best of luck with Start Thinking Rich. I know it's going to be a global bestseller. Continue to get it out into the people's hands that need it most. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
The Lead on Purpose podcast is sponsored by NZ Mortgages. Learn more at nzmortgages.co.nz.